Ban Dongwook possessed exceptional basketball skills. Partially because of these, the protagonist greatly admired him. After finishing the training, the man suggested they go home together. Captivated by Lee Do-hyun's appearance, he agreed to everything, having long regarded his best friend as his idol. Later on, while the dark-haired man was working a side job, the brunette initiated a conflict with another friend near the cash register. Despite clear attempts to defuse the argument, the man only exacerbated the situation. However, this time, he was not the main instigator of the quarrel. His interlocutor, angered by Dongwook, doused him with water and braced for a fight. The main character, observing everything, understood that his friend would no longer hold back. He hurried to stop him before a scuffle could start. Knowing that the brunette was stronger than the opponent, and thus the latter could be seriously injured. Nevertheless, the man was so enraged that he could barely stay still, especially after his friend suddenly insulted him because of his friendship with him. Do-hyun did not know how to prevent the fight now, as he himself was horrified by what he had heard. Soon, as the situation escalated and the brunette planned to strike his opponent, the blue-eyed man intervened, putting himself in the line of fire. This shocked his best friend, who had not intended to strike a close person. The next moment, the man became indifferent to his friend's fate, and thus he sent him away, deciding to focus on the young man's well-being. Although the main character tried to convince everyone that he was all right, after the blow he trembled with pain and was extremely pale. Therefore, Dongwook did not believe him and decided to check the injury himself. At that moment, as the young man tried to refuse such care, a familiar blonde appeared behind him. Yang Seungju was displeased with the beating of the dark-haired man, and thus he hurried to examine the injury on his body himself. The next moment, he began to scold the brunette for his actions, believing that such a fragile person as the main character should not be harmed. Despite everything said, the man ignored the acquaintance, and even wanted to leave, telling his friend that they should spend the upcoming weekend together. Dongwook's behavior displeased the blonde, but no one chose to listen to him. As soon as he left, Seungju suggested to the blue-eyed man that they should cease their association with him. He believed that a friend with such a volatile temperament simply could not be good, and thus any ties with him should be severed. Despite the acquaintance's advice, the protagonist attempted to explain that the brunette was indeed a good person. Given the circumstances, he was unsuccessful. During further communication between the friends, the blonde ordered his favorite coffee and asked if he could have it for free, but regrettably, Do-hyun had to deny the request. Despite such a response, it seemed that Seungju was not at all upset. Rather, he was simply astonished that he could not get a drink for free when Dongwook could spend the entire weekend with the young man at no cost. Comparing situations, the acquaintance explained that he found it strange that the two friends slept together. Being an extremely popular man at the university, the brunette still could not sleep without his best friend beside him. Naturally, this seemed abnormal. Nevertheless, the dark-haired man confessed that it had always been this way. During further conversation, the blonde mentioned that one day Dongwook would need to start a family, and therefore it was advisable to break the bad habit. Additionally, Seungju expressed concern for the protagonist and therefore suggested he find a lover as soon as possible and forget about his love for his friend. As an example of a good partner, he cited himself. Unexpectedly, the playful conversation about this turned serious. The acquaintance genuinely offered Do-hyun a relationship with him, but he took it as a joke. The next moment, the brunette appeared before the young man with special patches for injuries. He decided to apologize in this way and thus helped apply them. The man remembered that besides the injury site, the dark-haired man was in pain elsewhere, and thus took care of that too. The protagonist was touched by the care of his beloved person and immediately thanked him. Only when the man left did the young man mentally admit that he had many reasons to love him, despite his fiery temper. After some time, Do-hyun came to stay overnight at his friend's house. The brunette's mother was delighted by the visit, though she secretly wished the guest were female, as her son could then have not just a close person, but a life partner. When the dark-haired man heard such remarks, he felt awkward, especially since he had long been in love with Dongwook, but could not be his partner. Noticing the surprised expression on his face, the brunette's older brother intervened and asked their mother to stop behaving in such a manner, as it was clearly uncomfortable for the guest. While the man distracted his mother, he also asked the protagonist to go to the younger brother's room, who was already waiting for his friend. Ascending to the second floor, Do-hyun noticed his secret love selecting a book that the two young men would read before sleep. However, as soon as the brunette noticed the young man, he immediately abandoned his task to go to sleep, confessing that he had been unable to sleep for several days and needed rest. Once in the bedroom, the man lay on the bed and beckoned the protagonist to join him. Such actions from his friend perplexed the dark-haired man, but nevertheless, he willingly agreed. Subsequently, Dongwook passed a book to the blue-eyed man that was meant to interest him. Moments later, he embraced the young man to fall asleep. Do-hyun appreciated the situation, as from the outside, it might appear that there was a more personal relationship between the two young men beyond mere friendship. Despite the joyful moment, the dark-haired man recalled the unpleasant truth. His best friend had never shown interest in the same sex. The protagonist was gay, a fact he hid from most people, including Dongwook. He worried that their relationship might deteriorate if his friend discovered the truth. Unexpectedly, the brunette demanded not to be left alone until he had rested well. The blue-eyed man agreed with a smile. The protagonist's parents had died before he was born. A few days before the birth, they were involved in an accident from which only the child survived. For a while, Do-hyun was cared for by his grandfather, who also passed away in the early years of his grandson's life. After a series of tragedies, Do-hyun came under the guardianship of his uncle. Nearby lived his secret love, whom he had met as a child. During that period, the brunette suffered from insomnia, but it was discovered that in the presence of the blue-eyed man, he could sleep soundly. From that point on, the boys developed a stronger friendship, as Dongwook seemed to physically need the protagonist's presence. According to childhood stories, he could not sleep properly because he saw a ghost. Reflecting on this now, the dark-haired man was grateful to the non-existent entity for the chance to befriend his beloved. While his secret love, Do-hyun, slept, he would stroke his head, contemplating how he dreamt of always being by his side. A few days later, the protagonist met an acquaintance who suggested he go on a blind date with someone of the same orientation and gender. Although the young man tried to refuse and Seungju insisted, believing it necessary to break the strong bond between the two friends. As the blue-eyed man expressed his lack of interest in new acquaintances, asserting his love for a man, the blonde explained that it was time to let go of unrequited feelings and move on. Despite the validity of these words, Do-hyun was reluctant to agree with them because his love for the man was too strong. During the conversation, Seungju wanted to smoke, but he had no lighter. Unexpectedly, the dark-haired man gave him his own, although he did not share the harmful habit. In the past, the brunette had personally gifted it to the young man on his birthday, and although it seemed as if he was indifferent to his friend's celebration, the recipient was happy to receive the gift. Since then, the blue-eyed man has carried the item everywhere with him. While the guys were talking, they noticed a man walking nearby with his latest girlfriend. Seungju used the situation to demonstrate his friend's character to the young man and also to persuade him to go on the blind date instead of indulging in his secret love. As soon as the group met with Dongwook and his companion, she whispered something peculiar into his ear. The next moment, the girl hurried to approach and greet the protagonist as if she knew him personally. He responded timidly, having never seen her before. Nevertheless, the man's companion behaved boldly and even audaciously towards his friend. Initially, she complimented the dark-haired man and then began to touch him without asking. Unexpectedly, Do-hyun's secret love intervened. He called the young man attractive and agreed with everything the girl had said earlier. Such behavior from the brunette surprised everyone, especially the protagonist, who was embarrassed by what he heard from his beloved. However, once the two friends were alone, the blonde once again reminded the dark-haired man that he needed to pursue genuine romantic relationships and forget his unrequited feelings for his friend. That evening, Do-hyun contemplated that he would be compelled to go on a blind date, as despite his refusals, his acquaintance had persuaded him. Moreover, Seungju not only convinced him of the necessity, but also set the time and place for the meeting with the potential future partner. Unexpectedly, the blue-eyed man's reflections were disturbed by the arrival of the brunette, who had climbed in through the window. The first thing his friend did was ask about what was happening in the protagonist's life, as he could see that he was distressed. Although the young man was touched by the concern, initially, he did not confess the reason for his worry. Only after a penetrating look from his beloved did Do-hyun reveal that he had been persuaded to go on a romantic encounter with someone else. This news greatly angered the man, and he unconsciously demonstrated his protest. Despite this, the protagonist was compelled to explain the situation in more detail. He confessed that he was being forced to date because he was always alone. Dongwook was perplexed upon hearing this, knowing well that the dark-haired man had little interest in relationships with women. Although he was correct, the blue-eyed man could not confess his true orientation. For this reason, he was compelled to fabricate a preference for a certain type of person. Naturally, his friend decided to inquire further about it. The protagonist was flustered, as he had never been attracted to the opposite sex. Thus, without much thought, he decided to describe his beloved, albeit transforming him into a female character in his narrative. While describing certain features of the brunette, the young man tried to do so as if speaking about someone else, and surprisingly, he succeeded, as the man believed him. The next moment, Dong-wook began to dispute what he heard, believing that such ideal criteria could not possibly match any real person. Nonetheless, the blue-eyed man held a different opinion, which irritated his friend. Unexpectedly, the brunette even decided to leave the other's bedroom. Before saying goodbye, Do-hyun's secret love suddenly paused, as if reconsidering. Instead, he decided to ask for something more personal. Moments later, the man declared that he wanted to sleep together with the protagonist. Without giving him a choice, the brunette led him to the bed. Naturally, the dark-haired man began to resist, as his bed was significantly smaller than his friend's, making it cramped for two. Nevertheless, as soon as Dong-wook heard the refusal, he suspected something was amiss. Mistakenly, he assumed that the man didn't want to share his room because he planned to bring a girl there in the future. Of course, this was not the case, but the young man could not reveal the truth, so he merely denied the other's assumptions. This frustrated his friend, who unexpectedly pinned him to the bed. With tears in his eyes, Do-hyun explained that there wouldn't be enough space for both of them. But his beloved not only disbelieved him, but also attempted to refute the information he had heard. The next moment, Dong-wook attempted to inquire about the person his friend had just described. The man felt that such a precise description must pertain to someone specific. Indeed, it did, but the dark-haired man could not admit this. Trying to uncover the truth, the brunette speculated that his current girlfriend might be the one the protagonist was talking about. Do-hyun was shocked by this suggestion, as he had never had any interest in someone else's partners. He tried to refute the assumption as quickly as possible. Nonetheless, an infuriated Dong-wook persisted, unable to understand why the identity of the earlier described individual was not being disclosed. Noticing his friend's anger, the young man hastened to calm him down. He sincerely confessed that he could never fall in love with the man's girlfriend. Mentally, the dark-haired man continued, revealing his deep affection for the very person he was speaking to, who mattered more to him than anyone else in the world. It seemed that the man believed what he heard, and instead of further jealousy, he began to inquire why he couldn't sleep together with Do-hyun. With astonishment on his face, the blue-eyed man repeated the same answer. His bed was too small for the two of them. Soon, the brunette left the room, still unconvinced. As soon as he had gone, the dark-haired man began to reflect on the overly close contact between them. He realized that the true reason for his refusal was that he might not be able to restrain his own romantic feelings. Continuing his contemplation, the young man suddenly decided to rid himself of the excess emotions that had overwhelmed him in the moment. The next morning, as the dark-haired man discussed the upcoming blind date with his acquaintance, Dong-wook intervened in the conversation. He was quite displeased with what he heard, as it was clear that he opposed the blue-eyed man entering into a relationship with anyone else. Not hiding his own anger, he sought clarification about the planned meeting. Instead of Do-hyun, the blonde answered all the questions, as he was more assertive. Seungju explained that the protagonist was a mature individual and therefore needed to initiate a relationship as soon as possible. Unexpectedly, the young man intervened in the dialogue, stating that the date would not interfere with their regular weekend sleepovers. It seemed that the dark-haired man thought his secret love's negative attitude was provoked by a potential disruption to his comfortable sleep routine, so he tried to reassure him. However, the acquaintance began to scold the brunette for even requiring such help from another person, clearly indicating that it could be inconvenient for him. Having heard all the arguments, Dong-wook suddenly declared that a guy like his best friend simply couldn't have a girlfriend. The beloved's words horrified the blue-eyed man, as they sounded like an insult. Not only was the dark-haired man shocked by what he heard, but Seungju was also taken aback and immediately began to yell at the man, finding it unacceptable to say such things to a close friend. Do-hyun interrupted the others with his statement that he didn't care about the brunette's words, and furthermore, his personal life shouldn't concern anyone. Now, what he heard displeased Dong-wook, as it somewhat offended him morally. Without much thought, he approached the protagonist to discuss everything in more detail. At that moment, the young man honestly confessed that he had no plans to enter into a relationship with anyone, so there was no cause for concern. This response was more satisfying to the man, but it also surprised him because if Do-hyun had no plans to pair up, then there was no need for him to go on the date. The conversation between the two young men was interrupted by the brunette's girlfriend, forcing them to say goodbye. Before parting, the friend asked about the planned sleepover that weekend. The blue-eyed man agreed to come, even earlier than usual. Only after the conversation ended did the blonde express his indignation about the situation. He disliked the unfairness shown by Dongwook. Despite the fact that Do-hyun's secret love was constantly in relationships with others, he explicitly forbade the dark-haired man from having one. Clearly, this fact also upset the young man, but he did not admit it, as he was willing to endure any harshness from his beloved. That's why he asked his acquaintance to stop scolding the brunette's behavior and not to interfere in what was happening between them. At night, the blue-eyed man reflected on the day's events, understanding that he had greatly angered Dongwook with his behavior. Nevertheless, he did not know the reasons for this, as he had done nothing wrong. Looking at his body after the shower, the young man admitted that he looked unremarkable compared to his friend's current girlfriend. Sadly, he realized that he had no chance of being with the one who truly mattered to him. A little later, Do-hyun received a call from a colleague. He asked the young man to come to the establishment where he worked immediately, as two of his friends were about to start a fight. The protagonist hurried to the cafe to help prevent a brawl between two people close to him. By the time he arrived, Dongwook was already swinging a broken bottle at the blonde. It was evident that the conflict between the two men was intensely serious. Fortunately, the dark-haired man arrived just in time to stop his beloved's dangerous attack on the acquaintance by embracing him. Surprisingly, Seungju asked the blue-eyed man to step aside and not interfere. Naturally, the young man did not comply. Instead, he vehemently demanded that the blonde leave immediately. Despite the sensibility of the protagonist's request, the acquaintance did not intend to heed it due to his own anger towards the object of his secret love. The man's volatile nature irritated him. For this reason, without much thought, Seungju pushed Do-hyun aside and continued the altercation with the brunette. He demanded that he stop interfering so obsessively in the dark-haired man's life and spoiling it with his prohibitions. Just as the argument was about to escalate further, the young man once again tried to prevent it by promising his beloved that they could spend the night together if he ended the dispute. Immediately after hearing this, the man discarded the bottle he had intended to use as a weapon and decided to go home with his friend. Although the dangerous situation had passed, the protagonist admitted that he could not simply leave. First, he wanted to compensate the establishment for the damages. As he was about to do so, the cafe employees asked him to forget about the expenses and simply remove Dongwook as quickly as possible. Hearing this, the dark-haired man froze, unable to imagine that everyone so strongly desired his beloved to stop causing fights. Noticing the reaction of others, the man offered to carry the blue-eyed man if he was unwilling or unable to walk. Of course, the embarrassed young man declined the offer, and soon after, the two young men left the establishment and took a taxi home. On the way, the object of the protagonist's secret love slept on his shoulder, while he himself contemplated the upcoming night together with his beloved. Although such instances had occurred before following a series of personal moments between the friends, Do-hyun could not stop himself from reacting emotionally. Upon arriving at the house, the young man stated that he would first inform his uncle of his plans before coming over to the brunette's place for the night. Initially, this arrangement did not completely satisfy Dongwook, as he still wished to spend the night in the protagonist's room. However, he soon found himself compelled to agree to all of the blue-eyed man's conditions and went home to wait for him. Finally, he imposed a time limit on his friend to hasten his arrival. Otherwise, his desire to be in Do-hyun's bed would be fulfilled. Shortly after, the young man was already in the man's bedroom, having arrived on time because he was genuinely concerned about the conditions set. As he settled into the brunette's bed, the blue-eyed man inquired why he was so eager to sleep in his room. Embracing his friend tightly, the object of his secret love ignored the question, as he was very sleepy. Nonetheless, he soon initiated a conversation again, this time about the blind date. Dongwook reminded the protagonist of the ideal physical type he had described earlier, and added that he had learned from Seungju at the cafe that such a person was already interested in the dark-haired man. This revelation surprised the young man, as he had no idea who was actually being referred to. Yet he confessed again that he had no plans to enter into a relationship, and if he did, he would first inform the brunette. Do-hyun's words displeased the man, as they seemed somewhat contradictory. He became angry again, desperately unwilling to accept the possibility that the blue-eyed man might find a partner. Then, the protagonist explained that although he did not desire it, there was a small chance that he might one day be in a relationship. Completely disregarding all the dark-haired man's arguments, Dongwook personally concluded that his friend already had a beloved, and thus began to inquire about it. The young man was disconcerted by this, as he could not even imagine himself in a relationship with anyone, particularly involving tactile interactions and other romantic gestures. Despite this, he ignored his beloved's question and suggested they simply go to sleep. The two young men did just that. The next morning, as the protagonist was planning to leave the house, the brunette's mother stopped him. She expressed her regret at having to say goodbye so soon. The dark-haired man was clearly pleased to learn that his secret love's family held him in high regard, yet he still hastened to depart. The previous night, while they were supposed to be sleeping, the blue-eyed man couldn't fall asleep and instead gazed admiringly at his beloved's face, who was oblivious to his scrutiny. In that moment, he silently confessed his feelings for the man and dreamed of kissing him at least once. He refrained, however, fearing the revelation of his feelings. Ultimately, it was then that Do-hyun finally understood the blonde's advice and realized that he needed to relinquish his unrequited feelings for the brunette. He now attempted to figure out how to do just that. Unfortunately, the blue-eyed man found himself without options and broke down in tears. At that moment, unexpectedly, his phone rang. His beloved friend was calling him again. When the protagonist answered, he immediately sensed something was amiss. He could tell from the dark-haired man's voice that he was feeling unwell. Despite this, Do-hyun tried to assure him that everything was fine. Soon, the two young men were to meet again, and just the thought of it made the blue-eyed man unusually nervous. A bit later, as he was on his way to meet Dong-wook, the latter unexpectedly encountered him near the subway, claiming the meeting was coincidental rather than a deliberate act of care. The protagonist overlooked the oddities and even believed what he heard. Afterwards, the two young men began discussing Do-hyun's tutoring. The blue-eyed man smiled and confessed that his student was grasping the material very well. Although he was pleased to share this news, he suddenly remembered that he had never mentioned this side job to his friend. Surprised that the brunette knew about it at all, the young man decided to inquire further. Unexpectedly, the man explained that although no one had told him directly, he had overheard the blue-eyed man discussing it with the blonde. It seemed that Dong-wook was angry with his best friend, but tried to contain his emotions. Shortly after, the two young men entered the house together. Once again, the beloved's mother greeted the young man at the doorstep, as usual expressing that she would be delighted to have someone like him as a daughter-in-law. However, this time, the brunette himself decided to respond to what he heard. He candidly suggested his relative consider the dark-haired man as a potential partner for her son. This proposal greatly shocked the woman and horrified the protagonist, as neither of them expected such a jest. Nevertheless, the next moment, Dong-wook made it clear to everyone that he was serious. Consequently, he forcibly pulled the blue-eyed man into his bedroom. As they ascended to the room, he requested that no family members enter. Naturally, this statement surprised everyone as much as the previous one. While the man's mother was concerned, the older brother, on the other hand, tried to defuse the situation. He convinced the woman not to meddle in others' affairs, arguing that Do-hyun posed no threat. Meanwhile, the two young men continued on their way to the bedroom. The object of the protagonist's secret love stated that he would carry him if he refused to walk on his own. Once alone in the brunette's room, the two young men sat in silence for some time. The dark-haired man felt unmistakably awkward after the events that had transpired. Dong-wook decided to break the silence himself and asked something significant. He wanted to know why his best friend had not told him about his orientation. The question terrified the young man, as his greatest fear was that his beloved would discover this secret. Realizing what was happening, he immediately attempted to flee. Unfortunately, the man quickly caught him in his embrace. Only then did the blue-eyed man inquire how the brunette had learned the truth about him. Naturally, the blonde was the culprit. Although Dong-wook did not admit it, it was clear that the acquaintance was the only suspect. In the midst of discussing this, the object of Do-hyun's secret love suddenly kissed him. Immediately afterward, the man displayed his jealousy towards Seungju. He disliked how much the dark-haired man talked about and with him. The protagonist was greatly flustered by what he heard and suggested they discuss it. However, he was ignored, as the brunette had already pushed him onto the bed. Instead of talking, Dong-wook announced that he intended to do more with his friend than just talk. Moments later, he kissed the dark-haired man again, this time more intensely. Surprisingly, Do-hyun was not pleased with what was happening. On the contrary, his feelings were hurt by the man's actions. Although he found the kisses and touches from the brunette pleasant, he realized that things were not as simple as they might seem. Unexpectedly, Dong-wook asked the blue-eyed man whether he had ever kissed anyone before. Naturally, the embarrassed dark-haired man's response was negative. For this reason, the object of the protagonist's secret love decided to teach him how to kiss himself. He explained the details and even demonstrated them in practice. During the process, the man was astonished that the dark-haired man did not resist or push him away. This fact led him to believe that he was permitted to do anything. However, it soon became apparent that he was mistaken, as once Do-hyun realized his friend's intentions, he instantly got up from the bed and hurried away. This behavior shocked Dong-wook, as he clearly did not expect the young man to reject him. Soon, the dark-haired man prepared to go on a blind date, as he had previously promised a friend. Despite feeling upset after the incident with his beloved, the protagonist could not stay angry with him. Instead, he pondered what might have happened if he hadn't fled. Trying not to dwell on it, Do-hyun arrived at the designated meeting place for his date with his potential future partner. Upon seeing the man who came for the date, the young man was stunned because it turned out to be Seungju. Initially, the blue-eyed man thought his real date hadn't shown up, but it soon emerged that the whole arrangement had been orchestrated by the blonde, who genuinely wanted to be with him. It seemed the acquaintance was ready to demonstrate his sincere intentions, even going so far as to introduce himself anew to the protagonist. Of course, the young man took it as a joke, but as it turned out, Seungju was serious. He admitted his attraction to the dark-haired man and proposed that they start dating. This information greatly shocked the blue-eyed man, as he clearly remembered that both of his friends were not known to be of non-traditional orientations. In response, the blonde tried to communicate his bisexuality and elaborate on his special feelings for Do-hyun. After listening to everything and reflecting for a moment, the dark-haired man decided how to respond. With evident resentment, he explained that he did not want to be a plaything for his friends and thus would not allow them to experiment with personal contact with him. The blue-eyed man perceived Seungju's proposal as a jest and possibly an attempt to pity his solitary nature. Therefore, he was very negatively disposed. Although the acquaintance tried to prove the authenticity of his feelings and the seriousness of his intentions, he was not believed. Unexpectedly, the conversation turned to more candid topics. Nonetheless, the young man did not plan to change his decision about this, and thus, even after listening, continued to be angry with both of his friends. That is why, in the next moment, instead of calmly responding to the proposal to date, the dark-haired man responded with his request to end the friendship with the blonde forever. After trying to end the conversation with Seungju, the protagonist hastened to leave. Just as he was exiting the venue, the acquaintance stopped him to find out why he couldn't become a true partner to Do-hyun. The man was angry about the rejection, remembering that Do-hyun had feelings for his best friend, and thus he was confident that he could also captivate him. Although the blue-eyed man had never spoken of his infatuation with the brunette, the blonde had discerned everything when he noticed Do-hyun's gaze on the object of his secret affection. Moreover, although Seungju initially found the idea of a romantic relationship with another man strange, after observing the charming dark-haired man for a while, he noticed something alluring about him. Initially, the blonde treated the protagonist superficially and even compared him to a girl. But after getting to know him better, he unwittingly fell in love with him. He first became aware of his feelings during a basketball game when he noticed the blue-eyed man's height and then observed other features of his appearance. Soon, the blonde realized that despite his delicate appearance, the young man was considerably stronger than him personally. This unique detail made him special to him. The more Seungju observed the protagonist, the more he grew fond of him. The dark-haired man's good grades, gentle nature, and diligence intrigued him. When his positive opinion about Do-hyun filled all of the blonde's thoughts, he realized that he was truly in love with his acquaintance. Since then, the man had dreamed of confessing his feelings and starting a relationship with the blue-eyed man. As he pondered this, the young man suddenly announced that he was joining the army, and therefore further communication between them was pointless. This statement shocked Seungju. Initially, he did not believe this information, but soon, noticing the seriousness of his interlocutor, he was convinced of its truth. Only upon reflecting did the blonde suddenly realize that he knew absolutely nothing personal about the dark-haired man. He was unaware of his hobbies or life plans. Despite this, he was resolute about his feelings and believed in their sincerity. Therefore, as Do-hyun was about to leave, the man confessed his feelings to him again. Without giving a definitive response, the protagonist hurried to permanently leave the acquaintance's company. Late in the evening, the blue-eyed man sat alone in the establishment, nursing a drink. His thoughts were consumed by the events of the day. As he reflected, he realized that his feelings had been hurt by the blonde's blunt statements about his bisexuality and his capacity to date even those he did not favor. What pained the dark-haired man most was the realization that his beloved shared the same life principles as Seungju, which infuriated him. After drinking half a bottle of strong liquor, the protagonist hurried to leave the establishment. As he attempted to settle his bill, the brunette unexpectedly appeared and paid on his behalf. The man then led Do-hyun outside and began reproaching him for the amount he had consumed with evident dismay. While the object of the young man's secret love attempted to scold him, he himself muttered something indistinct about his reflections on what had happened earlier. The blue-eyed man's emotions fluctuated between sorrow and joy, likely due to the alcohol consumed. Mentally, he suddenly admitted to himself that he had never considered Dongwook a bad person. In that moment, he smiled and kissed his beloved spontaneously, greatly shocking him. Without hesitation, the brunette reciprocated the kiss, and now both friends were astonished by each other's behavior. Shortly thereafter, ceasing their personal actions, the man led his friend to a motel, evidently to continue what had started on the street. There, he earnestly requested that the dark-haired man never push him away again or forbid him to act as he wished. It seemed that the object of the protagonist's secret love was resolutely intent on achieving something more that night from his best friend.